realized my tallit wouldn't fall down so much if I didn't talk with my hands so much, but old habits die hard, and I don't plan to kill that one. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Jacob gets himself into a bit of a pickle. I'm not just talking about the needing to leave from home because of his issues with his brother, but I'm talking about when he sets himself up in Haran. On the one hand, it is a beautiful romantic love story. The penniless wanderer comes to the well, and there is his beloved. Smitten, he has the strength of 10 strong men. He flings the stone off the well so that she and her flocks can be watered. Gracious, beautiful, he turns, goes back, following her to her father's household, and there he starts messing up. It might be love talking, it might just be fear, it might be a young man who doesn't understand what the terms of the loan actually entail, as happens to many young people when they get their first credit card or take out college loans. But Jacob gets on the hook for 7 years of labor. And at the end of that 7 years, what will he receive? His bride. One wife. And how exactly does he plan to take care of her if he has worked for 7 years and has been unable to save anything because all of his labor was for that one woman? This is not thinking ahead, Mr. Jacob. Perhaps work a little longer to be able to afford to have a household, not to work that minimum 7 that Lavan sets for him, and then rush into a family life that you will be unable to support. And of course, he didn't read the very, very fine print on exactly who that bride was going to be, did he? No. Because, according to local custom, apparently, he is going to have to marry Leah first. All right, I've been cheated. What should I do next? I want Rachel. I want my actual beloved. And so, after the week of wedding feasting, I will marry her too, and then work another 7 years. 14 years in total for the one woman he wants and one that he didn't, but he's not done with having problems. He's not done digging his hole. Because what does he do? Well, he does what every young man does who has his new family. He sets about trying to procreate. He sets about trying to have lots and lots of children, apparently, and his wives do seem to be engaged in competitive breeding in order to see who can provide him with the children that will ensure that he loves them best. Will it be Leah? Will it be Rachel? Well, if they can't compete because they need time out on the bench, don't worry, they have backup women in the form of Bilhah and Zilpah that can come and provide additional sons as well. All told, by the end, we have at least 12 boys and 1 girl. Perhaps there were more women as well that were not listed in the genealogy because they were less important to the story. Yes, that can happen. But 13 kids, 4 women that he has to treat as wives, and he had to work 14 years for nothing more than room and board. Was this a good plan, Jacob? Was this a good plan? Did he bite off a little bit more than he could chew? Were his eyes bigger than his stomach, as the old saying goes? Or is this just the inherent problem with polygamy? Maybe it was not his fault. Maybe it was the culture that he was raised in, where polygamy was not unusual at all. One of the things I like to do whenever I am reviewing a parasha is to not only go through the traditional commentaries and modern Jewish commentaries, but from time to time, I like to peek over the fences and see what other faith traditions make of our text when they use it as their own. And in this particular section, as I was peeking over the fences, it turns out that Christianity is very, very uncomfortable with this whole polygamy thing. The fact that both Abraham and then Jacob now, and of course many of the other famous people throughout the rest of Tanakh have more than one wife, really puts them on edge. And they had a very interesting explanation from one apologist that this was only because it was the early days of creation. And God needed to fill up the earth with people as fast as possible. But nowadays, you shouldn't do it, because God only barely tolerated it, but, this is their words, God hated polygamy, but let it happen anyway. Leaves you scratching your head that if God hates something, why would God let it happen anyway if there is this ulterior motive that apparently God does approve of? Honestly, I believe that our God is a little more consistent. God doesn't ever say that polygamy is right or wrong. God simply says what the requirements are. The requirements are quite simple. If you are going to have more than one wife, you have to treat all of the wives equally. Simple, right? You have to actually show them the same level of physical affection and the same level of material support, and you have to ensure that all of the children from all of the women you happen to be married to will receive a proper share of inheritance whenever that time comes. So, no problem, right? So why is there no polygamy in Judaism anymore? Just a little historical background, just to make sure you're not thinking that this is something that finished just last week. Polygamy in the European theater, in the Ashkenazic world, was basically done away with about 1,000 years ago. Whereas within the Sephardic and Mizrahi communities, it was done away in the centuries that followed. But in some communities, most notably some of the Mizrahi communities from Yemen that came with the establishment of the State of Israel, polygamy was still happening until the 20th century. But in all communities now, it's gone. Why? If God says there's nothing wrong with it, if God lays out very simple guidelines for what's necessary to make sure that it's being done correctly, why don't we have more polygamous arrangements? I love the scoffing there. Are you saying that nobody's asking for it? That is part of the issue. I have not yet met somebody who came to me and said, Rabbi, I have found 2 women that I wish to be married to, and I would like to be married to both of them. Nobody's come to me with that request yet. You're laughing. In the old days, that was not unusual. It wasn't the norm. It wasn't like 90% of people had more than one wife. It's hard to tell from the record because the Torah doesn't give us the census of every single person and all of their marital relations. But it does not seem to have been the common activity, but it was not uncommon either. Certainly throughout the Mishnaic period, we hear of people with more than one wife, but they are more the exception than the rule, but it definitely still continued. So why do we have people not asking for more these days? Our diets have changed. How beautifully diplomatically put. Indeed, within the European arena, there is some evidence that the ban on polygamy was actually deliberately not to acknowledge our changing diets, but to prevent others of accusing us of having too large of an appetite. That is to say, the Middle Ages, in particular about 1,000 years ago, at the rising crescendo of Christian, what's the right word for it, purification, as they were becoming more and more religious in a unfortunately negative connotation, we became very mindful that they were heaping scorn upon the Jews who lived in Europe because we had too many sexual appetites. You must remember that if you look through Christian scripture, especially in the early centuries, it was very ambivalent about the whole marriage thing for even 2 people, let alone more. It was very ambivalent about the whole be fruitful activity, and thus, we see celibacy moving into their clergy. And in Judaism, you had occasionally men with more than one wife, and that just, made them clutch their pearls and made them look down their noses at their Jewish neighbors because we were clearly just ravenous beasts giving in to the temptations of the devil. Judaism's never considered being with your partner to be giving in to the temptations of the devil, but we were nonetheless conscious of the scorn, and we felt it might be best for some communities to not have multiple marriages in order not to antagonize, a population that was easily antagonized and easily provoked to violence. But that wasn't the only reason why polygamy was eventually tamped down. The changing of the appetites, I will argue, is actually best understood through the same parallel as the tefillin. Tefillin, you'll remember, are the small leather boxes we wear on our arm and on our foreheads when we are davening on a weekday, when it is not a holiday or Shabbos. And if you go back into the rabbinic literature, you'll realize that God never said, only wear tefillin while you're praying. God said, wear tefillin. And yet, if you look around, even on a weekday, you don't see Jewish people wearing tefillin the whole day. Why is that? Well, quite simply put, the rabbinic literature clarifies it, I think most astutely, that wearing tefillin is a little different than wearing a talit. A talit is a garment. It's a garment that we wear, and if we wear it, we have to have tzitzit, done. But the garment itself doesn't have an inherent layer of sanctity. It is merely a tool allowing us to fulfill a mitzvah. Tefillin, on the other hand, have words of holiness written inside of them on tiny little parchments, similar to a mezuzah, and as such, they have a different level of sanctity. If we are wearing them and fulfilling the mitzvah of wearing tefillin, we must remain focused, concentrated, have kavanah on the performance of that commandment. And that means we cannot allow ourselves to be distracted by other things, whether it be business or whether it be the chores of daily life or anything else. While wearing tefillin, we have to be in tefillin mode. And quite frankly, say the rabbis of our antiquity, that's too hard for most of us. That for most of us to remain within a perfectly focused world sufficient to be wearing tefillin is simply a bar that is too high. And as such, we would be wearing tefillin incorrectly. And doing a mitzvah incorrectly in this way is worse than not doing the mitzvah at all. So instead, we wear the tefillin while we can focus during our tefillah. They work together, our prayers and the tefillin both reinforce the focus needed for each. And when our prayers are done, we take them off. This is why you'll notice in a minyan situation, like Sunday, 9 o'clock every week, we will put on tefillin, and when the tefillin are on, the joking goes away, the kibitzing goes away. We become more focused and attentive as we prepare and then continue through our prayers. And when the tefillin come off, then we switch back into the chatty mode because we are no longer focused on that way of thinking. Well, so too with ribui nashim, with polygamy in Hebrew. Like I said before, it is quite simple to follow the rules of having more than one wife. Each one must be looked after, they must be cared for, they must be attended to, and you have to make sure that there is a measure of equality among all of them. But in all honesty, that's hard. In all honesty, many people find it hard to do that with one spouse. And to take on an additional spouse when one is still struggling to provide the proper level of care, affection, and attention to one spouse would be the equivalent of wearing tefillin 24/7 when you can't even remain focused for 10 minutes of davening. And so we discontinued the idea of having more than one wife because we needed to focus on doing it right, at least for the one partner that we enjoyed at that one time, rather than expanding more opportunities for getting it wrong. And if you need evidence of how hard it can be to get it right, well, you heard a lot of it through the Torah chanting this morning. Like I said, Jacob ended up with a lot of trouble, 14 years of debt, 2 women, only one of which he wanted to marry, and then he started having lots of kids, but it wasn't just the financial strife that he brought into his household through his inability to plan properly. It was also the emotional strife. We see the tension played out again and again between Rachel and Leah, naming their children competitively because of the rivalry between them. We see the tension again between Rachel and Leah to bring in additional wives to buttress their own position, but which only creates further stress. We see, indeed, the most painful exchange between Rachel and Jacob when she is feeling left out because she is unable to have children, and he tells her, "So what's it to me? I'm not God." The starkest example of a lack of compassion for one spouse. And yet, even though it is clear that he cannot provide her and her sister the proper level of attention, he is willing to accept a third wife, at that point, her handmaiden, to become the surrogate for additional children. And when that doesn't work, to mollify everyone, Leah then produces a fourth wife to be added. And when she offers Zilpah and Jacob takes her, we get a very interesting quirk of the Hebrew writing. It says that as she is naming her son God that comes, she names her because Ba-Gad, because my fortune came. But if you read in the Torah, it doesn't have the two words separated. They are written as one word, Ba-Gad, which, if you know your Hebrew, means betrayal. Betrayer. He betrayed me. Indeed, Leah is complaining because she offered Zilpah, even though she'd already had multiple sons of her own, as a way to see whether or not her husband was desperate for more, and he fell for the trap. He should have said, "Leah, my beloved, you have already blessed me with so many children. Why would you need to think that you need to bless me with any more? Of course, you are the love of my life, the apple of my eye." But that wasn't how Jacob thought. Remember, he has a long road for his own personal transformation. And so he went, "Okay, another wife? Sure, no problem." And Leah's like, "Ugh." Now, it is also her fault. You never offer something to someone unless you're willing to have them take it. But we see the pain played out again and again and again. So what do we learn from this? We learn from this that we have to focus on the one that we are with. It is easy to be distracted by thoughts of having more. It is easy to be distracted by maybe I'm done enough and I don't need to worry about that other person in my life. But we must. If we cannot even make one relationship work, whether it be a relationship of husband and wife, or whether it be a relationship between two close friends, or between brother and brother, or sister and sister, if we cannot find a way to make one relationship work because we are unwilling to provide them with the attention that they deserve and unwilling to live up to our responsibilities and obligations, then we are falling into the same mistakes that led to the tragedy of Jacob's family. Because mind you, from this point forward, because of the mistakes that he has made now, we are on the fast track to slavery in Egypt. The decisions that he is making now and that his wives are making along with him will provide the ultimate salvation for our people, but it's going to be a long and bumpy road of generation after generation of interfamily hate and pain, leading ultimately to our enslavement in the land of Egypt, which will then create even more pain and suffering before our final redemption. All of it could have been avoided if Jacob had simply been a little bit more careful when he was signing on that dotted line, and a little bit more attentive as a husband, and if Leah and Rachel had been able to feel that love and act in a way that reciprocated. We can learn from our ancestors, from both the wonderful things they have done as well as their mistakes. We don't need more spouses in our life. We need to treat the spouse we have with more love and respect. Shabbat Shalom.